Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Charities Lean Forward, Navigating Employment Law and HR Practices for Charities. This webinar is organized by Pro Bono SG in collaboration with the Office of the Commissioner of Charities. I am Regana and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Now, before we begin, here are some housekeeping matters you should take note of. We will be using Pigeonhole Live for Q&A. You can submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and I'll do my best to take it. And also vote up questions by others that you would like answered. So the more votes for a question, I will likely get to that. Now, if you have a smartphone or a tablet with you, you just have to launch your internet browser and enter www.pigeonhole.at into the address bar. So now if you see on your screen, you can enter the passcode, which is CLF1909. Alternatively, you can click on the link that's shared in the chat function to launch Pigeonhole Live on your device. If you're viewing this webinar from your laptop, you should receive an invitation to launch Pigeonhole. Now, please note today's discussion is not intended to substitute any professional advice, even though we have a lawyer on the panel, no professional advice. And if you require specific legal advice, please consult a lawyer. So let's get started. Now, charities play a vital role in our society, serving those who are in need and working tirelessly to improve lives. However, like any other sectors, charities face your own unique challenges, especially when it comes to employment laws and human resource practices. Today, we will be exploring and unpacking key issues that impact how charities manage their workforce, comply with legal requirements, and safeguard public interest through good governance. In this webinar, we will aim to uncover the latest development in employment law, best HR practices, and the importance of conducting background checks for board members to ensure robust governance. And I hope by the end of the session, you have walked away with some practical insights that you can take back to your organization and implement it. So let me introduce our panel of esteemed speakers who bring a wealth of experience and expertise today. We have Francis Goh to my far left. Now, Francis is a seasoned mediator, legal advisor, a problem solver with over 30 years, looks very young, I know, of experience in legal practice. Drawing on his extensive expertise, he provides strategic counsel to clients across both public and private sector. He firmly believes when parties fully understand their legal rights, they are empowered to conduct their business with confidence and clarity. Next, we have Patrick Tay, who is quite famous for the work he does. Now, Patrick is an Assistant Secretary General of NTUC and the Director of NTUC's Legal Services and Strategy Division. He is also a Member of Parliament, representing Pioneer SMC since 2020. Patrick has been the forefront of policy making in Singapore, particularly in employment practices and governance. And last, certainly not least, this young man over here, Paul Heng, is an experienced professional from the charity sector. Paul has worked extensively with charities and non-profits and currently is with Dementia Singapore. He's here to offer practical perspectives on how charities can implement effective HR practices that align with their mission. Panelists, thank you very much for joining me and all of us today. Now, with these diverse and experienced voices of each of you, I'm confident that our charities will walk away with lots to think about, lots to implement, and some key strategies. So with that, I'm going to dive right in with Francis. Let's start. Now, as I said, charities have lots going on, right? Governance, fundraising, managing people, managing volunteers, managing outreach services. So why should charities be concerned about employment law?
Thanks, Regana. Let's dive right in and deal with the truth. Just because you are in the charity sector and doing charitable work doesn't mean that you can ignore employment laws. So you need to have a mindset shift. Think of it this way. Your core resource in any charity are your people. From your leadership at board level, your middle management executives, to your part-timers and your volunteers. You are dealing with people. And the employment laws are the framework whereby you can care for your people. Think of it this way. If you focused on fair remuneration, if you focus on benefits for your executives, part-timers and volunteers, if you focused on best practices, then you would make your charity attractive to the best talent. And happy, motivated people would do their best for your core mission of charity. Back to you, Regana.
Thank you very much. That's a lot to unpack, which I'm going to certainly ask both Patrick and Paul to weigh in on this. But before I ask them, maybe share with us what are some of the legal pitfalls that charities can sort of identify or might face when encountering employment matters.
Well, if we take it at the board level, how are you going to find and attract the right talent? And how do you ensure that you have in place proper governance so that you comply with all the checks and balances that are required to win public confidence as you perform your duties? And at the middle management executive level, you want people who are aligned with your purpose. They come, of course, with a mission. They are aligned with your mission, but do they also have the skill sets? So are you supporting them with the right training and support? Are you hiring based on merit? And we can talk more about this later, but these are things that you must pay attention to. Otherwise, you are going to run into disgruntled volunteers, disgruntled community who are saying, why are your people serving me like that, of such low standard? Or worse still, as you go higher up, the use or misuse of public funds. All these are problems that can be avoided so that you can focus on your mission of charity. So those would be key disputes or pitfalls.
Okay, so I'm going to throw it back to both of you. I see you're both nodding your head. Maybe I start with Paul first.
Yeah, sure.
Paul, you have been on the ground. You have been with so many charities and now with the Dementia Society. So tell us some of the pitfalls that you might have faced or what you have seen charities face and how, yeah.
I think if you look at it from the systemic point of view, I think charities start off with a mindset that we are charities, we are not for profit. Therefore, we don't have enough money. And therefore, because we don't have enough money, we can't do a great many things that other organizations want to do. So I think this is the mindset that we all need to change. And if we start at the 30,000 feet level, I think the mindset of wanting to run a charity like a business must be in place. First, before you make decisions, before you bring the board members and the top management into the picture. So one of the key things that we need to talk about is, are we clear what is our vision? Are we clear what we are supposed to do? If we are clear, then what are the strategies that we need to have to bring things forward? So in that perspective, I think all of us would do well to take a step backwards and say, okay, let's take a breather. Let's kind of rethink where are we going with this organization. So Dementia Singapore is 30 years old. And a couple of years ago, when I joined the board, we decided that we will do a refresher. And part of that refresher is a change of key people, not just at the top management level, but also on the board. Once we do that, then we're able to really be in the game,
Mm.
right? So if you want to be in the game, then you need to bring in the right people. And to bring in the right people, you need to pay them the right salary. So it's a mindset change. It's also a practical thing that you need to do to really prepare yourself for the future, because the world is very different these days, right? If you look at it, well, the last time I looked at it, I mean, charities still have the same mindset. So I think we have a long way more to go before we can actually say that, okay, let's get serious about this game. Let's try and bring in the funds that are necessary to run this organization professionally. And I think it all starts from there. We are not zeroing in on HR. We're not zeroing in on fundraising. It's really taking a look at the global, at the broad perspective of the charities that we all belong to. I think that would be where we start.
Thanks, Paul. Patrick, would you like to add something?
Yeah, well, I just want to echo some of the points. I thought since we are talking about employment law, specifically for charities, what Francis shared earlier, very, very important. If you're a charity, you can be a company limited by guarantee, it can be association, and in whatever form. But unfortunately, or should I say fortunately, employment law actually will imply quite a number of obligations on each and every one of you, all your charities. You're not spared from it because as long as it's an employment relationship, then you attract many of the employment laws. And employment law is actually a very, very big word. Well, some parts of the world, they call it labor law. But employment law is actually a whole spectrum, particularly in Singapore. If I may just highlight some of the key pieces of employment legislation, you have the Employment Act, which you need to be familiar. And if you go into a dispute, there's the Employment Claims Act. And also, when it comes to in the unionized environment, there's the Industrial Relations Act, Trade Unions Act, and even in the day-to-day remuneration and looking after your workers and your employees, there's a CPF Act, there's the Work Injury Compensation Act, including the Workplace Safety and Health Act, because you need to have a workplace that is safe and secure for your employees. So there are many pieces of legislation that will encompass employment law in general, and there are specific obligations, and mind you, some are mandatory, so you need to observe them. So you cannot lose sight of it. You cannot let the ball drop, because the authorities will come at you, your employees will make complaints against you, and these days, not just employees, it also covers part-time employees. And of course, volunteers is another sphere, but more importantly, the employees, the part-time employees, your re-employed employees, and those even on contract, your contract employees, including independent contractors or freelancers whom you engage. So all this will have specific pieces of legislation, regulations, policies, and also rules. In Singapore, we are uniquely tripartite. When we talk about tripartism, we have Ministry of Manpower, the labour movement where I'm from, and as well as the Singapore National Employers Federation. And most of the things in Singapore are tripartite in that sense, where there's a lot of tripartite negotiations and discussions before things particularly impacting the workforce and employment and labour laws or policies get rolled out, get passed in Parliament. So very, very important to look at beyond just employment law, some of the guidelines, the tripartite guidelines, tripartite advisories. We've seen a whole spectrum of them during the pandemic, like about 4 to 5 advisories. I know because I was quite deeply involved in quite many of them. And these are important because it sets some ground rules and basis when you operate your business, operate a charity, and run your programs and activities. So I thought I'd give a baseline kind of sharing on some of the things that will impact you as a charity, and you'll be treated similarly, as Francis alluded to earlier. I just want to reiterate, you'll be treated exactly like any employer, any business, any organization.
Patrick, thank you for setting that baseline. I just wanted to jump in here, Regana.
Sure.
You know, we were talking about a mindset shift. Paul said, think of your charity like a business. And now Patrick's talking about, think about employment laws. But to the audience out there, I want to shift your mindset. Don't look at it from a compliance perspective. I better do this in order to comply with the law. That kind of thinking will get you only halfway, perhaps. Think in terms of using the labor laws to position your charity to take care of your core asset, the people. Think about what Paul was saying earlier. Let me just share with you the Tripartite Alliance Fair Employment Practices Guideline. It's something that Patrick had just mentioned, and there are 5 principles. The first one is you recruit on merit. The second one is treat your employees, your part-timers, your volunteers fairly and treat them respectfully. Then provide fair opportunities for training and development. And then, Paul's point, reward them fairly based on ability, contribution, experience, and job performance. The 5th one and the last one is comply with labor laws. So if you see the way that the guidelines are structured, they're not talking about compliance first. They are talking about all these other good and best practices that are really about caring for your employee. And I think it's on that note that we want you to take away the employment laws and the practices that Paul is going to share about later, and think about how you can build it into your charity.
Thank you. There's a lot to share. Hold that thought, Patrick, because confirm I'm going to ask you a few questions after this, but there are some questions from our participants, our audience actually, and I think I should ask, and it's open to all 3 of you. The first one, which is very popular, are there any specific HR policies or compliance measures required by Singapore Commissioner of Charities? Maybe Paul? Patrick?
Patrick.
Yeah, I believe Commissioner of Charities, in fact, have come out with a code of practice for charities to comply with. I thought that was a good starting point. Yes, well, in more ways than one, it's not made like hard letter law. I thought it's a very good starting point where you can take reference from. They are divided into various pillars, various areas to look at. So I think, and now we have even gone into ESG in that sense of the word. So I thought that would be a very good starting point for you to make reference. And I'm glad that, and I'm aware that there are quite a number of parties out there that are trying to help and to uplift some of the charities who want to better their governance, better their practices, and better their knowledge. So like today's session, I think it's just one big and bold move. Want to at least give you a sort of a primer and a baseline understanding on particularly employment laws as well as HR practices, and which you can allude to. So I thought that code would be a good starting point. But over and above that, actually, we are quite fortunate because as we are talking about employment law and HR practices, there are actually quite a number of resources available out there. Firstly, if I may share a few practical handles, even I refer to them. Firstly, of course, the Ministry of Manpower website, fantastic resource with lots of the advisories, guidelines that all of us are talking about. I thought that would be a good starting point. So there's I still visit their website quite often whenever I need to extract some of the resources, some of the legislation, even some of the playbooks and some of the templates are in there. So don't fret if you need something. There's something out there. There's a template. There's a checklist. There's a sort of like a playbook for you to refer to. So that's at the MOM website. I thought a few other useful websites, particularly for example, in the HR space, would be the IHRP website, the Institute of Human Resource Professionals. That's a great website because there are quite a few playbooks, templates, and lots of giveaways and grants that you can tap on, that you can better your HR practices and tap on some of the networks and the former networks as well. And as Francis alluded to earlier, TAFEP, Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices, they also have a website, tafep.sg. And I thought that's a very good resource if you want to look at many of the tripartite standards, some of the guidelines, in particular relating to fair and progressive employment practices. So these are baseline, some of the useful ones. And myself coming from NTUC and the labour movement, I can't say And I can't not do justice to my organization by referring to also the NTUC website at www.ntuc.org.sg, where actually we have quite a lot of resources there for you to tap on to cater to the various segments of your community, from the young to the not so young, to the females and family, to the PA professionals, managers, executives, and there's a whole slew of services. Of course, some you can only tap on them if you are a union member, but otherwise, there are also other resources. For example, like our Employment Employability Institute, where if you're looking at hiring, attracting, pitching for talent, actually make use of this service, and it's totally free. And we have now gone on a big, evangelistic outreach to want to encourage training and skills upgrading. We realize it's impacting all workers, whether it's in the charity sector or otherwise. So we have actually formed more than 2,300 company training committees. So we are actually on the sojourn out there. So if you are keen, you can also, like I said, drop a message through the webpage and contact us, and we'll be happy to provide you some of the training grants and to help you in your journey as you uplift and professionalize your charity.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I actually have a question for Paul, which I think it's about right. A lot of charities rely on volunteers, right? Not paid staff, fully volunteer run. So there's a question here now. Without money, how do we get the right people on board to grow the charity? Because right now, I'm assuming this charity is just relying on volunteers to run the outreach. So any tips for this person who has asked this question, how do they get the right people on board to grow this charity without having the right funds or enough funds?
Not enough funds, but you want to attract the right people to run these charities or to run the volunteers?
No, just to run the charity or to grow their charity.
Well, I think it's quite simple, right? So if you're running a business and you don't have money, you go and raise money. So in the charity like Dementia Singapore, we are of course fortunate to be receiving some grants from Jinghu. But we also need to do our own fundraising. Like for example, last weekend, I hope some of you actually attended our charity concert. Richard Marx came to play for us.
I missed it.
And we raised a bit of money. So you have to find people who can help you to raise money. And it's not one person's job. It's not one department's job. It's the whole entire company's organization's job. Even the board members need to be on board to help to raise money. And everyone needs to be a marketeer in the organization to tell people that they meet, to tell their friends, their relatives, that this is what Dementia Singapore is doing. Okay, come and support us. So if everyone does that, I mean, every dollar counts. And of course, over time, you get a little bit more money. So if you don't have enough money, then I think the first thing you need to do is go and find the money. And don't just entrust it to your fundraising person, entrust it to the whole board, because the board is not there just to attend meetings twice a month, right? They're also there to write checks and then to help raise money and do whatever they can with their network to help the organization that they support. Otherwise, then don't be on the board.
So I have a follow-up question. I've worked in nonprofits before, and this question is quite pertinent. Sometimes charities can't attract good quality candidates, right? Because salaries not attractive, and sometimes charities wait very long for a good candidate to come by. So do you have any tips to address this challenge? If someone's looking for a charity is looking for a good candidate, any tips to address this?
Yeah, I think the first thing, Regana, is to ask yourself, why is my charity not attracting the right talent, right? And it's not just the money, because in my organization, we have initiatives in place to help people with charting out their own career path. And I think these kind of things you only get in NMCs, but in Dementia Singapore, we actually have a very systematic process to allow people to chart their careers and even to have career coaches talk to them. Right. And just to cite one example, we have a person from HR who wanted very much to be working with the people on the ground. So she asked for a transfer, and we transferred her because she has the right skill sets to be taking care of our clients. So she's now working with persons with dementia and caregivers and try to write out a case for these people, see how best we can support them. So we have people transitioning from HR to care support. right? We also have people who are moving from one function to another function, and it's all because of this process we put in place to allow people to have healthy conversations, safe conversations about how do I develop my career with Dementia Singapore. And once you have that, I think people will start to notice, and very soon, Dementia Singapore may well become an not-for-profit of choice. And that's how I think we should be running the organization.
Wow. Okay. We're going to get back to that.
Sure.
But I'm going to go to Patrick, who has his ear on the ground of everything and anything employment. Now, Patrick, maybe could you share a snapshot of new and upcoming updates in the employment sector?
Sure. Thanks, Regana, for that question. I think, in fact, I would say the last decade has been a watershed decade in the employment space. Practitioners in this space will know that there have been quite a number of updates, minus the 4 years, 2 years plus of pandemic, and many of the advisories and regulations. But there are also quite a number of changes. For example, the Employment Act was revised 2 times. And just recently, we had the Platform Worker Act just passed in Parliament. Something new, may not impact you directly, but good to know that now we have laws to better protect vulnerable platform workers, for example, in the private hire space, or even food delivery or dispatch or goods delivery. So that's one example of something new that's come to this. I don't think may be relevant for everyone, but it's good to have a sort of like a working knowledge of it, so that you know that there are actually laws looking after this vulnerable segment. The other one I thought quite salient and important is this tripartite guidelines on flexible work arrangements, the right to request for flexible work arrangements. This has been introduced something like 2 months ago and will come in force, the guidelines with effect from 1st December later this year. So I thought useful to have a quick look at the deck of guidelines. You can Google it, it's quite readily accessible. Otherwise, either the MOM website, which I alluded to, as well as the TAFEP website would have, even the IHRP website would have links to this set of tripartite guidelines on flexible work arrangements. And I think TAFEP has been going on quite a big outreach in many ways to different segments with tripartite partners, with different interest groups to better price them of what these tripartite guidelines entail. And it's a very quick and easy, ready to read deck which they have done, a small booklet, not many pages. You can finish it in about 10 minutes. It's a good reference if you have not already done so to read it. There's even a checklist behind to help you and a template to help you at the annex in case you are scrambling and don't have such practices already in place. In fact, most organizations will have, but I think charities sometimes you may not have updated some of your employment contracts. You may not have updated some of your, well, I know some of our charities are unionized companies, so you have collective agreement, that's fine. But some of you may not have updated some of your HR policies and manuals and practices. So it's one good development which you can literally cut and paste from. It's available. So besides the Platform Worker Act, which is just passed in Parliament a couple of weeks back, and as well as these tripartite guidelines, there's a few important pieces I thought you all should take note of. There's upcoming one before year end, what we call the workplace fairness legislation. Keep a lookout for it. There's actually there's actually already a tripartite guidelines on fair and progressive practices in especially with what Francis alluded to earlier. I thought this tripartite guidelines, TGFEP for short, tripartite guidelines on fair and employment practices, is a good starting point because many of that will be encompassed within this upcoming piece of legislation. In fact, I sit on a tripartite work group and we actually rolled out a deck of recommendations, something like 23 to 25 recommendations. Came out late last year in August. You can Google it as well. So that will give you a hint in case you want to kind of like do preemptive strike or do some anticipatory preparations for this upcoming bill. So that's something that is in the horizon, actually not too far horizon, 2 months or 2-3 months away. And we don't exactly know when the act will come into force, but I thought useful. Why? Because it's sort of like an anti-discrimination law where we call it workplace fairness in the sense that we want a fair workplace in terms of pre-employment, during employment, as well as in the exit of employment and termination employment. So in all the employment process, there will be this piece of workplace fairness to ensure, well, some protected characteristics, about 6 of them, from age to gender, including to caregiving arrangements, some newer ones, mental health and wellness, etc., etc. So there are, of course, in Singapore, race, religion, etc. So these are some of the protected characteristics which this new legislation will cover, and it's a law, so it's no longer just a tripartite guideline. So just to pay attention to it when it comes up. I'm sure there'll be some. We might even do a primer on it to better apprise what's in it for you. And finally, I thought useful is every year. Sometimes maybe charities may have ignored this. Every year, the tripartite partners actually issue what we call a National Wages Council guidelines. Used to be sometimes within May, June, but we have revised it. It's coming up usually in the last quarter of the year, usually October, November period, in the next 2 months, in time for the end of the year, because the end of the year is where the public sector declares its annual variable component. So I thought useful for you to make reference to this National Wages Council guidelines, because that sets the tone for wages and wage practices for the rest of the year, i.e. 1st December 2024 to 30th November 2025. So as this is totally in line with what we are talking today about employment law plus HR practices. So this is actually positive HR practices to follow these guidelines which are set across the board, and it gives you a good benchmark and a proxy to follow. Yeah, like I said, it's a tripartite guidelines, but do take it seriously. Yeah, I can elaborate more why you must take it seriously. But really do take some of these guidelines seriously because we are encouraging the best practices so that you have not just fair but progressive practices and attract the right people and keep the right people.
Okay, so just to double confirm, FWA, Flexible Work Arrangement, 1st December 2024. So everyone's taking it seriously. What can they do to prepare? Any tips? Any tricks?
First things first. I alluded to that short booklet, a very, very simple booklet from the TAFEP website. Please download it. I don't know whether we can get it on the link to you via this. We'll try to get it to you. Please download it. It's a very easy to read. Please read it. So in less than 10 minutes, you'll probably get a hang of or the gist of the substance of what you need to do. And the templates are in there as well. So I thought that is the one and only thing you need to do. And find a way to perhaps even apprise your board. You decide to amend your policies and circulars. Just to update lah. I'm sure this will be an added boon to your employees and your organizations.
Paul, you have something to add?
Yeah, thanks, Regana. I wanted to ask Patrick this. I can't resist this. Today's newspaper, Straits Times front page. No need to reply to emails and phone messages after 5 for the teachers.
Yeah.
Is that amongst the 6 things that you mentioned?
No.
No need, that one.
It's not among the 6 things. Why? Because actually that arose through. Actually, I mean, now in my other hat, I wear as GPC education chair. I've been lobbying for our educators in particular because we've been getting feedback from the teachers' unions. We recently had a big round of engagements with them. And we realized that many of the teachers are a bit, for want of a better word, like call it workplace harassment, right? They get all sorts of harassment from parents as well. So that's one feedback which we have given to Ministry of Education, particular Minister himself. And I think that's the announcement yesterday was that during the MOE work plan seminar, I was there paying attention and attentively to every single word he mentioned and spoke on. And I'm glad that some of these bold moves are made. Send a strong signal that just as we also want to to disconnect sometimes, we also, in the people that we interact with and touch base with, we also want that mutual respect, which Francis talked about, the respect for space, time, and each other's commitments and obligations.
Maybe just to add to Paul,
Yes.
I think Microsoft has this thing that at a specific time you want to send out an email very late at night, it prompts you to say, are you sure you want to send this email right now at 9 p.m.?
Yeah.
So,
I think recently Australia also came out with national guidelines to say that you cannot send messages after work hours.
yes.
Yeah.
So another 1 or 2 more questions for Patrick. Now, are there any special or specific considerations that differ charities compared to private sectors when it comes to this law? From what I've heard, no.
No, yeah,
They're
that's right.
treated
So
the same.
that's why it's a very important to remind all our charities there, whether you are a two-man show, three-man show, or 300-man show, you need to comply with some of these. But I like the way Francis put it. Don't take it as sort of like a compliance requirement. Take it as a way of ensuring your staff, which is your most valued asset, are being looked after. And when you have happy staff, happy workers, you have a happy organization, and your organization and your charity will do well.
So I have two questions, but I need to ask this as a volunteer, because I volunteer at Pro Bono. Many charities rely heavily on volunteers. Does the FWA, any of these upcoming laws affect volunteers?
Yeah, the flexible arrangements are actually for employees only. It does not extend to volunteers if you read the tripartite guidelines. So for volunteers, they are volunteers, you better treat them well. Otherwise, they'll disappear. Yeah, because they are all volunteers. They don't get any benefit from you. But I thought useful for just to make it clear that some of these guidelines and employment laws do not apply to volunteers because they are not your employees. They are not your part-time employees as well, but they are really doing it voluntarily. But please treat them with love, encouragement, motivation, and to keep them engaged.
Francis, I know you have something.
Yeah, just to add to what Patrick is saying, yes, the legislation doesn't extend to volunteers, but I think charities, you need to understand that these volunteers are representing your organization to the public. And if they do something that is not perhaps right, it could then boomerang back into your organization in a legal concept called vicarious liability. All right. Of course, it's debatable. There are exceptions, but you are a charity and you want to do good work. And the last thing you need is this kind of problem where you're involved in a lawsuit, you're on social media, people are taking you to task because of what your volunteer did. The flip side of it is, as Patrick said, treat your volunteers with respect. Your volunteers will need support and training. So your resource or your employees should have a level of training where they are able to manage and motivate these volunteers. And again, that comes to the training and skill set and finding the right people to promote your organization, as Paul was talking about. And so it's, as Patrick and Paul are mentioning, one whole ecosystem. Don't see employment as just one silo. See it as part of managing your entire ecosystem.
So this is a very important question. I'm going to ask quickly. How can you address bosses who are not in favor of FWA or not in favor of staff working from home with these flexible arrangements? Patrick?
Yeah, I can understand where the question is coming from. It's also not an easy one because I say it takes two hands to clap. So we really hope, if you look at the tripartite guidelines and the way it's phrased, we hope both the employee and the employer really come to terms and be open, transparent about it. If it's really serious operational concerns, they could be frontline workers. They can't really be on flexible arrangements. They have no choice. I mean, that's the nature of the work. But however, where there's possibility, for example, if the person is in the back office, back room, or middle office, and there's room for flexibility, or he or she, particularly, for example, has a short-term caregiving arrangement which he or she needs, I think it's important to have that critical conversation with the supervisor or the boss or the employer to work out something that's amenable. Because at the end of the day, it's not easy to recruit people. I'm sure the boss wants to retain and attract good people and keep good people. But at the same time, also the employee also has needs that sometimes because of exigencies and because of strenuous circumstances, they need to take and sort of have more flexible work arrangements because of some special requirements back at home, own caregiving arrangements.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So, Paul, let's talk about your experiences, your challenges at Dementia Singapore. during the years in which you are also in now, what are some of the challenges you have seen when it comes to implementing employment law at maybe Dementia Singapore?
Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are very fortunate to have taken a very bold step to bring in fresh blood. So that step of bringing fresh blood, I think, was the beginning of good things for Dementia Singapore, because now we have a very professional and experienced HR professional heading our HR department. And she's responsible for all those good stuff that I mentioned to you just now. So for us, I don't think we have too much of an issue, fortunately. But I think for many organizations, the lack of a professional HR person is where the stumbling block comes in. Because I think I mentioned this before, right? If you don't have enough money, you need to go and find the money to hire a professional HR person. And my personal opinion is that try not to bring in people from the same sector, because they tend to come in with their own pair of spectacles. Whereas if you go out to the whole of Singapore and find that professional HR person, I'm quite sure that you can find someone who doesn't come in with that pair of spectacles and come in with a fresh perspective. And this is a good thing, because then this person can bring in fresh ideas, innovative ideas, and brave ideas, if I may say so. So for example, Patrick, you talk about the flexibility of working location, right? These days you have work from home, you have, so for frontline people, we can't do that because they have to be with the clients. So what do? We came out with this flexi time, right? So with flexi time, you can actually allow the individual to articulate his or her needs in terms of the hours that he or she is able to come to work or not come to work, and then you just work around that challenge. And the whole thing, I think, stems on trust, right? A lot of leaders.
Yeah.
Somehow they don't trust the employees if they don't see them. But if you're able to put that aside and says, okay, this is your KPI. I don't care where you do it from. I don't care what time you do it from. Just make sure you deliver your KPIs. I think things can be worked out. So a lot of bravery, a lot of mindset change needs to come in so that you can actually progress to a space where you are deemed to be an employee of choice. Right? And I think that's very possible too for not-for-profit organizations.
So now with all these new things happening in the employment scene and landscape, it's a very exciting times. So how can small charities or any size charities communicate this clearly to their employees, their staff? Any advice for charities on how they should start communication? Should they start preparing now for what's to come in December?
I think the board needs to weigh in on this, because I mean, just like business organizations, right? What we've been seeing for quite a few years is companies coming together to synergize, to form M&As. So one of the things that I have thought about was, why is it not possible for not-for-profit to also come together? If you have fairly similar causes to champion, can you not work together as one charity instead of 2 or 3 charities, so that you have synergy of resources? So again, it's about thinking outside the box to say, how else can we do it differently? How else can we make things work better? And I think it's the entire system that we need to think about, and also maybe do a rebranding of the whole industry of not-for-profits, right? I mean, many years ago, if you recall, the education sector had a problem attracting good teachers. And then what happened? They actually did a rebranding exercise. They pay a little bit better. And now you see principals and teachers who are as young as they are in their 30s. This is unheard of during my time, because the principals at my time, during my time, they were all in their late 40s, 50s, or even 60s, right? But these days, you're able to attract people who are young enough to bring in fresh ideas, innovative suggestions, and be a better principal, be a better teacher. So I think the whole sector needs to do a rethink and maybe a rebranding, and try and do things a lot more differently so that we can be better as a country.
Patrick, Francis, any advice to our charities on how they should communicate these changes coming up? Maybe Patrick, I'll start with you first.
Yeah, I think don't fret. I saw some of the questions coming in. Don't be overly worried. Maybe I've made you all even more worried after today's session. citing so many pieces of legislation, laws, and guidelines. I have to because I'm telling you that this is the landscape. But I thought, don't fret, don't worry, because I know many of our charities are not huge and may not have the whole, spectrum of resources. So do it one step at a time. I think, like I said, I alluded to some of the resources. In fact, some of these organizations, they are giving assistance in a voluntary basis, as well as some grants to help you perhaps even do job redesign or as I shared, NTUC, we are quite big on going to training of workers, and even not just training of workers, training of HRs to uplift them. So I thought, don't fret, prioritize, set your goal to try to make sure that you are meeting some of these requirements. I said, go for the low-hanging fruits first. There are quite a number of stuff that's already readily available that you can implement within the day. So try to make full use of resources. You can and some of the agencies have also took the extra effort to make it a very bite-sized infographics. So you can use that as sort of like a communication channel, or no harm sharing what they already shared. So this is, I think, although don't worry about copyright. The agencies be most happy if more people know about some of the programs, policies, plans, laws, even some of the guidelines and advisories. So feel free to use all these resources. They are all available, but you just need to patiently navigate some of these spaces and do it one step at a time. So don't fret.
Francis, any advice?
There's a lot that you all are hearing now, and I'm sure it's overwhelming for all of you. I would distill it down to just 3 words or concepts. First, mission. Under mission, Paul was mentioning the board has to drive this anticipation and preparation. But I would suggest that perhaps you relook your mission against the resources available, the resources that Patrick was highlighting, and see how you can leverage off these resources to help you achieve your mission better. The second thing I want to leave with you is this whole concept of trust. Patrick mentioned it, Paul has mentioned it, and if you think about it, it's the trust at the different levels, the trust at the board level, the trust between the board and the frontline people, your executives, and the trust between your organization and your constituents or your stakeholders. You need to build that trust. And I think if you get the messaging out that we are retooling, we are reskilling, we are upgrading, we are paying attention to things in order to serve you better, that trust will be strengthened. And the third point I want to leave with you would be prioritize. Change isn't effected overnight. Change is coming, so you cannot stand still. But prioritize what needs to be fixed now, what needs to be fixed in 3 months, what needs to be fixed in a year. And I think, Paul might share more details about his success story later, about how over time that change was made and, his organization is now in a happy space.
Okay, I actually have a legal question for both Patrick and maybe Francis, or maybe Francis and then Patrick. Is it illegal for a company who doesn't cover WICA for corporate staff?
Sorry, say that again?
Is it illegal for a company who does not cover WICA, W-I-C-A, for corporate staff? Patrick?
Patrick, first.
Yeah, I essentially the WICA is a requirement for all employees. So whether you take it on your own or go through some of the insurance companies or insurance brokers that provide WICA, it has to be, you have to purchase WICA, or should I say, therefore, anyone who is in an employment relationship, your employee, will be covered by WICA under the Work Injury Compensation Act. And if anything happens to him or her in the course of work, I repeat again, in the course of work, he would then be entitled to make a claim under WICA. So therefore, it's your prerogative. You may have to pick the tab if you didn't purchase the necessary insurance for any of your staff.
I want to add to what Patrick is saying. Many times in the lawyer space, we are asked these kind of questions: can we or cannot? Should we or should we not? But this is a short-sighted, binary form of thinking. Flip it around to look at it the other way. You have an employee who might face contingencies and where your company may have to pick up the tab, as Patrick says. But for the payment of a small premium, you are then having coverage over a large contingency. And of course, the other way of looking at it is, why pay that money? It may never happen, but then you never know. So the important thing is be prepared, comply with the legislation, and comply means you care.
Thank you. Wow, we have covered so much of legal talk, right? I know it's a lot and we've got more to cover. So let's now look and shift our focus to HR practices. Now, recruitment is very vital for charities and sometimes it can be very tough. Retaining talent is even tougher, right? People move on to sort of greener pastures, sometimes they say. So Paul, Dementia Singapore has been recognized for HR awards. You've been recognized for really great HR practices. In a snapshot, share with us your journey, or Dementia Singapore's journey, that it took to implement best HR practices and how these practices have contributed to the success of the organization.
Well, I think it all stems from the board's decision to do a refresher, to bring in fresh blood. And from then on, I think good things happened because we were able to implement very effective HR policies, very innovative HR practices. Like, for example, I was telling you about the ability of our employees to actually move from function A to function B. And this kind of processes is not easy to implement because bosses will always say, so if Patrick is good in what he does, why would I want to release him to Francis? So these are things that we have talked about, we have debated about, and we decided that the best thing for Dementia Singapore was for all the heads of departments to align themselves with the thinking that it's for the greater good of Dementia Singapore that Patrick moves, right? And that Francis allows him to move. And these are things that we put in place. The other thing that we put in place is training. Training is so important, right, Patrick? You said that just now. So when we talk about training, it's not just about the skills required to do the job. It's also about soft skills, supervisory skills. It's also about digital skills because now the whole world is evolving into AI and digitization. So you need to prep our employees so that they are ready for the digital age, right? So these are things. And then the practices like work from home, flexi hours, and these are practices that we have put in place that allowed us to be different. And hopefully, well, my hope as chair of the HR committee is one day Dementia Singapore might be branded as an employer of choice. That would be kind of a good legacy to leave behind.
It's like a cherry on the top, huh?
Yeah.
So let's come down to the boards, right? Or come up to the boards. How can boards of charity contribute to these checks and balances that are in place? What can boards do?
Well, I think the board needs to be clear what are their duties and responsibilities. Sometimes, and I'm guilty as charged, right? Sometimes the board wants to get involved in the operational stuff. Right, and this usually pisses the operational people off, which I've done quite a few times. So I've learned my lesson. And one of the things that the board needs to do is to give support to the operations team to make sure that they are well briefed of changes. And Patrick, you alluded to some changes coming up. I think the team needs to be abreast of all these changes and to bring to the board, okay, what are the implications of these changes to our employees, to the dollars and cents that we will need to fork out or not. And the board will then need to take a decision to say, okay, these are the new things that have come on board. We need to toe the line, charity or not, we are still an organization. and we are not exempt from the law. And from there to drive those changes down the line so that, we remain operating on at a legal level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a question for all three of you. We spoke about professional development, job redesigning, upskilling, and actually we also have a question which I will get to. What are some cost-effective ways? Because not all charities are well-funded, and as we have some of the questions, what are some cost-effective ways charities can offer training or growth opportunities for their staff? Maybe while you're having a think, Paul, Patrick,
As you asked a question, I was thinking of the whole
list.
list of it might be just focus on three big pots. Firstly, of course, nationally, we all know there are lots of skills future funding that supports employers, which includes charity, but yeah, employer. And I'm sure the Commission of Charities as well as various agencies also have their whole slew of programs, courses, short courses, and skills for you to pick up and to tap on, which are heavily funded. We are quite in a fortunate position because in Singapore, unlike many parts of the world, many of these trainings, whether they are employer supported or even individually initiated, have high levels of funding support. So I think we are starting on good ground. So that's one big piece, employer supported, meaning as an organization, you can actually tap on that. Second one is individual initiated training. Of course, all of us have our own skills future credits. If you're 25 and above Singaporean, you will get the skills future credits. Depending on your age, yeah, like me above 40, you get a bit more.
Same.
All of us here get a bit more. You can actually go for some of the programs. They are listed at My Careers Future, as well as the Skills Future Singapore portals, which the links are all provided there. So that's another platform where you can tap on some of these programs, almost literally, I wouldn't say free of charge, but heavily subsidized. And finally, of course, I must say again, if you are part of the labor movement, we have something called the LXP, it's a mobile learning platform app. You can tap on many of the programs. So as a NTUC union member, you can actually tap on a whole range of thousands of programs on the go, on the move, anywhere, anytime. So these are examples. And also we fund our union members every year to the tune of $250 every year. You can't roll over, but it's reset at $250 every year. If you're above 40, then it's $500. To go for a series of programs that's across varied spaces, including those that are relevant for all of you. If you want to know more about employment and HR practices, we support many of the programs, including if you look at some of the programs I alluded to earlier, for example, the IHRP programs, certification programs, they are now Skills Future funded. Use your credits for it, and you can tap on all these grants. So I think there's no shortage of funding. It's just you have to decide what you want what skill you want to pick up, what's relevant, and then find which whether you want to do it through your employer on your own or tap on some of the labor movement schemes and company training schemes.
And I think it's very important to have that conversation with your employer, right? If you want to redesign your job scope or you want to move within the organization. And Paul, anything to add here?
Yeah, training is one of my pet areas, right? So I think in addition to what Patrick has said, I think there are free courses, free training that you can avail yourself to, like Coursera, for example, is free. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about was come next month, October, the whole senior management team and some board members is going to attend a 2-day workshop on systems thinking, systems training. And this program is brought to us by SIM. And because of connections and networking and what have you, we were able to bring the cost down from a 5-figure number to $400.
Wow.
And that's for the entire senior management team of 10 over people. So there's a lot of money that we have saved. So the key point I'm trying to make is that you need to leverage on your network to try and reach out to people that would otherwise not be available to the general public, and you try and leverage on your relationship, on your network to try and get things done for your organization. As I said, it's all about using your network, and networking is something that I'm super active with, which I think has borne fruit.
Oh, I support the networking part. Francis, yes.
Yeah, okay. So Paul has approached it from the networking aspect. Patrick here has talked about funding and talked about different types of causes. I want to approach this subject from the priorities point of view. If you were in having a time pressure or a funding pressure, then prioritize communication skills. Because in your charity sector, you are dealing with people. And while a lot of us have our hard skills, we may not be, comfortable or good in communicating, say, visions, requests, or even under pressure. So communication, supervisory skills is another one.
Networking,
Yeah,
fundraising.
exactly. And also the having difficult conversations, where you might have to handle negotiations or just deal with a difficult constituent or person. Focus on these, go through the resources available, check what funding is available, see if your network can even offer these kind of causes, and off you go.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in on this point because Francis, when you talk about communication, reminded me this very important thing. In my 2 decades dealing with employment relations and industrial relations, many a times a lot of disputes or unhappiness in the organizations emanate from communication. Usually lack of communication, miscommunication, or even total failure of communication. So I thought this is very, very important. I just want to weigh in on that and to say that, especially in this new landscape, you don't want to hear things on the social media before you hear it from the boss or from your colleagues or even from your volunteers. So I think it's very, very important to try to over-communicate because communication actually builds trust. Communications actually, forge solidarity as well.
Yes.
And communication also brings people together. And not just communication, mind you, today, you can't say just communicate, but not just over-communicate, but do it contemporaneously as soon as maybe, before, it goes into other platforms and you get the information and the news from other channels. I think that's the last thing you hope as an outcome. So I thought very, very important, this communication bit, whether it's your employees, to your board, or the board to the employees, the secretariat, or even to the volunteers. Because I know many of the charities, the volunteers play a very, very crucial role.
Indeed.
Some are even full-time
Yes.
volunteers, no? I know some volunteers who are really 24/7. They are even more on the ball, so to speak, than the staff themselves. So I thought very, very important to communicate to all your various stakeholders and partners to make sure that there's everybody's at level speed. What's happening, the direction, the strategic direction, some of the updates. So to find ways to communicate. Nowadays we have WhatsApp and various platforms, Telegram. Of course, different strokes for different folks. Yeah, so just find the best way to get the message across, even to your stakeholders and partners, or even donors.
Yes.
Because when you communicate and they know what you're doing, what your direction, and if they find resonance with that, then you might get people knocking your doors to want to support your cause.
So on that communication, it's also consistent communication. I think it's very important. Sometimes we can communicate, forget for the longest of time, nobody gets updated, and suddenly something drops. I'm good. Yes, of course.
Yeah, I was dying to speak. Okay, so Patrick, the thing about communication, I believe, as a coach, is that people usually listen with the intent to respond. So when you were talking, I was quickly finish. I want to talk. So I wasn't listening to you. But when we listen with the intent to understand, I think there will be less understanding in this world. So when we listen with the intent to understand, then we can formulate our response. Then I think it will be a more effective communication, right? Many times people think communication means what you talk about, what you write about, but it's also about listening. So as a coach, the most difficult part for me to transition from a HR person to a coach was learning to unlearn how to listen. And I don't think I've mastered it, but I think I'm a little bit better. But in this kind of platform, you want the other party to stop talking, then you can start talking, right? So listen with the intent to understand, then respond. So in Dementia Singapore, we have implemented two forms of communication. One is what we call CEO's coffee. Have coffee with the CEO, where the CEO communicates changes. Then the other thing, of course, is a bigger audience where we have a town hall. These are the two things. And the third thing was something Patrick said that I wanted to add on. When it comes to performance appraisal, I'm of the school of thought that you give feedback to people as and when it happens, or as soon as it happens. Don't wait until end of the year or wait until 6 months later to say, you know, that incident where we had this meeting, this is what you said, and this is what you didn't do correctly. So by then, Patrick will say, huh? What was that?
Now then you tell me.
Now then you tell me. Yeah. So the whole thing is about instantaneous, almost instantaneous feedback. So the person can relate to it and then make changes, modify behaviors. So communication, on Francis' point, is never enough. Communicate, communicate, and communicate, because nobody will say too much information. Unless you end up repeating the whole thing over and over again, then people will say, oh, I very lost.
So our audience is actually listening, and they're listening to understand. So I have a couple of questions. I'm going to take this one because I think it's a sensitive topic. Should salaries remain confidential or be known throughout the entire company? Who wants to take this? Paul.
As a HR person, I can tell you this, salaries will never be confidential. Somewhere along the line, people will say something and then people will know. I mean, in the government sector, we know how much the PM is getting, right? We know how much is Patrick getting also. So I don't think you want to keep this as a secret. If your com and band system is fair and equitable, you should not be afraid of people knowing each other's salary. That's my take on salary.
Yeah, and also nowadays there are a lot of salary benchmarks that are available
Yes.
online and offline. There are many HR companies, consultancies doing salary benchmarking across sectors. So you probably can get a bit of a sense of the range for the particular job in a particular sector, even a not-for-profit sector as well.
Yes.
There are actually a lot of salary benchmarks. So that's a good indication. So of course, particularly when it comes to bonuses and merit increments, some bosses or some organizations may prefer to keep that confidential. But if otherwise, like I said, most of the salary ranges or benchmarks are quite readily available these days. Even in our unionized companies, we have a collective agreement with salary ranges at the rear as annex. So I don't see any issues with disclosing ranges and sharing benchmarks.
Yeah, I think in our modern age now with social media and all these things, you can try in your company to say that keep it confidential, but everybody's going to become aware of it. So I would rather err on the side of making sure that your salary and compensation is fair. And if you compare it to a benchmark, that you are then able to use objective criteria and say, okay, the market's paying this much, and for whatever reasons, we are only paying this amount, but people understand because you are transparent and you are being fair. And when it comes to appraisals and bonuses, yes, companies or even charities might be hedgy about explaining why the bonus is this amount, but you could publish, for example, your bonus will be based on a certain criteria. All right. And when people understand that, oh, it's their job experience, their job performance, their contribution, their ideas, their initiative, they accept whatever figure given to them later, ultimately because it's measurable against objective criteria. So these are some ideas that you could use in your organization as you try to bring yourself up to speed and handle this sticky topic.
Yeah, I think with remuneration, with wages, if you just have to go on Glassdoor and you just
Yeah.
do a search, I could get anyone sort of salary range, right? At any level. Okay, so we've spoken about the law, we've spoken about HR practices. Let's look at some strategies for retention. Patrick, I have a question for you. We live in such a diverse community, right? So how can charities ensure that hiring practice is inclusive and diverse?
Yeah, I can't emphasize more the importance of diversity and inclusion. I'm quite big on this. I embrace this very, very much. I mean, not just the fact that there's a tripartite guidelines on fair and progressive employment practices, but I think diversity, particularly in Singapore, if you're operating in Singapore, if you look at our demographic profile, we have a bit of an aging population.
Yes.
I wouldn't say a bit, it's going to be quite bad in 6 years' time when we have one out of four are above 65. But at the same time, we have a very, very low fertility rates for the last decade or so. So which means that, you have lesser new entrants. So you are dealing with a workforce which is a bit more of age. So that's one important demographic or workforce profile. Second, in Singapore, you have local and foreign workforce as well. That complements that we have a foreign workforce. About 1/3 of our workforce is foreign, and they complement our local workforce in various sectors and areas. Maybe perhaps not so predominant in the charity sector, but in other sectors where there's a need for certain skills or skill sets, or even some unskilled labor. So that's the other one. The third one I thought important to note is that our profile of our workforce is changing.
Mhm.
We used to have quite a predominantly blue collar workforce. That was about 50. In fact, the majority is blue collar. Look at Singapore 40, 50 years ago. The white collar is only like 10% or 10 to 15%. Today, the white collar is about, if you include professionals, managers, and executives and technicians, 62%. Wow. If you drop the technicians, which actually I would say they are also professionals in that sense, it comes to about 42%. Still a majority. It's going to be, and it's growing exponentially for a variety of reasons. All of us are moving up the career ladder. All of us are moving up the skills ladder. All of us are moving up the education ladder. So more people are better qualified, better skilled, better experienced, and therefore become what we call the white collar or PMETs for short. So you are contending with a good mix of blue collar, white collar. You're contending with older workers, lesser younger workers. You're contending with local foreign workforce. So I think very, very important. And of course, in Singapore, we are multiracial, multi-religious. And now we are trying to encourage more women to rejoin the workforce. We have made great strides, I would say, the last decade. Today, labor force participation rate of women much higher than a decade or two ago. I mean, we are trying to create an ecosystem which is a bit more palatable, attractive to allow those who can come back to work, come back. Yeah. So you have a situation where you're going to face with, I thought, something which I've anticipated and I forecast will be a multi-generational workforce. Meaning, even as you hire younger employees, you have your not so young employees at the same time. And you have people who are coming in mid-career. And you have people who used to be rank and file, still staying on rank and file, but you still have people coming in who are PMETs. So you have to contend with this as charities. In some of these charities, I know work are global charities. And so they have also foreign workforce as well. So very, very important to have diversity, inclusion, even for the board, because we want to bring different experiences, different expertise, different skills and knowledge together so that we are greater and we're more synergistic. I thought that's very, very important. I see diversity inclusion as a strength. Why? Because each bring with it his or her own experiences, domain expertise, and skills. So and as we go out, depending on which charity and which sector and which particular focus or mission or objective of your charity is, then build your team, build a diverse and inclusive team so that you can serve the needs of your community.
Paul, how does Dementia Singapore include diversity in your HR practices, your hiring practices?
For us, it's actually quite different. So Patrick said that the 62% white collar, right?
PMETs.
PMETs, right? For us, a very high percentage, in fact, more than 50%, what we call allied healthcare professionals because of the business that we're in, right? So for us, the challenge really is not so much diversity, but where do we get these people from? Because there's a dearth of experienced people in this sector. So usually it's playing musical chairs, right? So we recently hired somebody from a related government agency to join us. And this pool of people tend to move around, like musical chairs. So for us to be able to do that, I think is good enough. But we don't have enough people. We need to go outside. And Patrick, this is where sometimes the permits that we have, the work permits, and whatever MOM has stipulated, sometimes give us a bit of a challenge because we cannot find good quality people. And for me, someone that is good quality means not so much the training, but also the mindset and the heart. So a good doctor is someone who can maybe perform a safe, a surgery, for example, right? A surgeon. But this doctor will be even better if he or she is able to communicate well with the patient, with the family members, and to do it with a heart. Not to say like you have cancer. Right? There must be many ways you can communicate, but that is the worst thing that a doctor can ever say. So for us is to find people who are not just trained, but also with the mindset, because the people that they are taking care of are very different. Taking care of an aged is very different from taking care of somebody with dementia. And this is something that we cannot emphasize enough. So to find the right people, we'll be lucky if we can get the right people. If we can get diversity in that process, then I think we've done a great job. But it's not something of a choice. If you know what I'm saying, yeah.
Yes, I do. So maybe a question for all three of you, but I'll start with Paul. You've spoken so highly of your HR head. Do you know what's her name?
Her name is Tracy Kwan.
Okay, so Tracy has done this really great work at Dementia. So how can someone like Tracy, who's in other charity organizations, foster a positive workplace culture despite financial constraints, right? Some charities are very small. And when charities are this small, people are wearing so many different hats. And a HR could be a volunteer manager. So how can that person sort of instill positive work culture in this day and age with work from home and, flexible working arrangements?
With all due respect, Regana, I think that is the wrong mindset. This piece doesn't belong to HR. It belongs to the entire organization, and it needs to come down straight from the board. So if the board walks its talk, then it transcends down to the whole organization. So HR cannot be held accountable for this very important piece, which is the culture. So Tracy, has done a great job, but she's not able to influence the entire organization. That needs to come from the board chair, the board members, down to the top management. Everybody needs to walk the talk. And that's kind of my take on the topic.
Paul, Francis, Patrick, Francis, anything else to add before we go on to board? Lots of questions about boards.
Yeah, I was looking through the questions on the pigeonhole, and I'm quite excited to answer.
Yeah, I'll get to it.
Yes.
Get to it. So maybe before we get to these ones, let's speak about board members. Since Paul, you unpacked that already. We talk about board members. Now, charities are held to a high standard and are often under a lot of public scrutiny, right? You've got donors, public money coming in, grants. And ensuring ethical employment practices is key to maintaining trust with our stakeholders, our donors. So maybe, Francis, I start with you being the lawyer. What legal obligations do charities in Singapore have when it comes to vetting board members or senior members like CEOs, CFOs, COOs?
Okay, you have got some resource available. You can refer to the Code of Governance. You can also refer to the Board Appointment Guide for Charities. Now, use these as your baseline and starting point because these are built on the other laws in Singapore about directors' duties and liabilities. It's just that with charities and IPCs, there are greater checks and balances. But your question was also relating to vetting, right? So let's assume you got this great candidate that you think will be a great fit for your board. So what reference checks do you run? You would have, of course, an obvious thing to call the previous employer. All right, who is this person? What he's contributed? What has she done? And why is she leaving your organization? All right, the reason for leaving might give you a red flag, right? Maybe she was dismissed or he was dismissed. Those kind of things. Then you do the reference checks. The reference is the person who says, call these referees. Such people, you then ask them, what is the person like? Are there any strengths and weaknesses, any preferences, style of working? And then, of course, you have the financial checks. You go to the Credit Bureau of Singapore and you can find out whether this person is prudent financially. All right. Then you could go to the Singapore Police Force, ask them for a certificate of clearance. You could also do checks on global sanctions and see whether this person is a wanted person on an AML list, anti-money laundering. All right. And, so you have also then social media. Now, in all their CVs, they're all trying to put their best foot forward. But then you go on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and find out what this person really is like, their interactions, their tendencies, and then you form a view whether this person will be a right fit for your current board members, whether this person brings the forward thinking or the new thinking that might be needed in the board, and whether or not this person is compliant. So again, in my description, you will see that compliance is necessary because there are things that you need to look out for. But all this is done in the context of getting a good fit for your organization. Making sure that this person that comes in will contribute positively rather than undermine. It's again from a context of caring for the organization, the mission, and your people.
Is anyone pushing legal boundaries? If you're going to go and check someone's Instagram, TikTok, is that pushing any boundaries there?
Well, you can follow and unfollow people. All right. There's nothing wrong with just going on the social media platform, type the person's name and, see what comes up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul, is there anything to add?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me because over in Dementia Singapore, we have a process where we put potential board members on committees. So let's say if I want to put Francis on the board, I will invite him to consider being a member of my, say for example, finance committee. All right. And then he stays there for about 6 months, and then we observe. People observe, and after 6 months, if we really need somebody on the board, so the board composition is very important. We don't just bring people in because I like Francis, but because we need someone with a legal background. Then we say, hey, Francis, how has it been for you with Dementia Singapore? Then if he says, yeah, I think it's a great cause, I'm very happy to be here, I will ask him, so are you ready for another level of commitment? Then if the conversation goes well, then we introduce him to a nomination committee, which I also said. And we talk to Francis, and then we say, okay, I think we may have a fit here. Because I also need to consider, in addition to what he has said just now, what Francis has said, whether or not he can gel or potentially gel with the other board members. Because I don't want to bring him in, and then later on he quarrels with the chairman, right? Or he quarrels with Patrick or whoever is the chairman. And then I have a bigger problem,
Yes.
right? So the nomination committee's task is to make sure the person coming in is likely to make a contribution, number one, understand what are the implications and obligations and responsibilities, and also be able to work well with the other team, the other board members. So that's how we kind of mitigate the risk of bringing in the wrong person.
Patrick.
Yeah, I agree with both Francis and Paul and some of the points brought up. I thought also other if you find too cumbersome to do some of these checks, actually available some of these service providers that do such checks for you. from whether they are involved in some litigation to even socials. I think now I know most hiring managers and even nomination committees are looking at LinkedIn profiles, and now LinkedIn has embedded verifications and a verified the blue tick, whatever tick you have on your various socials to make sure that they are legit and genuine. Those are possible additional due diligence platforms. But more importantly, I thought important for the board and management to truly reflect the mission of that particular charity in the board composition and the hiring of people. People who are not just have the passion and align with the purpose, but at the same time also representative of the community or the constituency they are serving. For example, if you are a charity for youth, you don't even have a single youth on your board. I mean, as in the youthful person, at least, it'd be quite a anomaly, and you may not be able to reflect strategically or to make strategic decisions that will help the organization propel and make inroads into that particular community or constituency you're serving in. So I thought it's important for the board to see what's its mission and its values, and whether this potential board member or potential management or staff can align to that.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're back to Francis now. A question here. Any legal processes or guidelines? Let's say now we've got this great board member sitting on a board of my charity. 6 months down the road, we find out that he or she is not a great fit and has done something wrong. Okay. Are there any processes or guidelines that charities can follow or refer to in the event that they need to remove this board member who's no longer aligned with the organization's vision and mission? Paul, I'm confirmed coming to you, but I want to ask Francis first.
Okay, Paul will give the lowdown on all the practical aspects, but let me just say that from a legal perspective, you've got this wonderful person. Not only does your contract have to have all the fair remuneration benefits, that's just one part. There is another part of the contract that people would rather not discuss at those happy times, and that's the termination clause. All right, you need to think about the circumstances and how you want to terminate that person. Is it 1 month's notice, 2 months' notice? Is it 6 months' notice? And you also need to consider what if there are disputes. So it's easy to say if there's a dispute, I'll see you in court. But that's very old school kind of thinking. Nowadays, people are more nuanced. They're talking about mediation, where the process is confidential, where parties are able to talk face to face. So do consider having that kind of mechanism as well. And a lot of the disputes happen because there is no proper mechanism to monitor a person's performance and then show that person is non-performing before you actually axe the person. So there's a lot of, perhaps a misunderstanding, miscommunication that, oh, you are victimizing me, you're picking on me, you didn't give me a fair chance. So make sure that your contracts have that kind of mechanism of appraisals, of putting a person on performance observation, clear performance indicators, so that when it comes time to pull the plug, the process is more objective and you can have an easier conversation. So that's the legal perspective, how you can mitigate that risk of the inevitable wrong fit, the need to terminate. Perhaps the others have different views or additional views.
Patrick.
Maybe perhaps before Paul jumps in, I thought important to set the context. You have a situation where you have employees at the board. So what Francis just shared earlier is a situation where there's an employment relationship. You want to terminate it properly. However, in board appointments or board appointees or board members, there's not really employment relationship in most instances. So there might be some procedures that are required. Because I think one go-to place is each of your charities would have a constitution.
Mm.
It could be M&A or whatever, but there may be set procedures that you need to comply with before a removal of a board member or even a removal employee. So to take note of that. Absolutely agree, Francis. If you want to do it not just fairly, but responsibly, empathetically, and progressively. And there are some rules that you need to follow. Like I said, the resources are available. You can tap on them before you execute anything. And yeah.
Paul.
In Dementia Singapore, we have a rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is that every potential board members must know how to drink whiskey. So if there's a need to have a tough conversation, we invite the person out for whiskey. So if the person doesn't drink whiskey, then at least coffee.
Yes, I was going to ask coffee.
Coffee is also okay. So I think, I think Patrick's point and Francis' point are valid. But in the case of board members, I think everyone is a volunteer, or most people are volunteers anyway. And you'll be very touchy and sensitive to say, okay, we don't need you anymore. So I think being very subtle, being very diplomatic about wanting to terminate a relationship is something that we all shy away from, right? If we can avoid it, we rather avoid it. But then there will be occasions where we need to do it. Then I think the way to do it is to bring the person out for a meal or coffee or something like that and talk it through. Because we are all adults, right? So if we can do that, then I think there will be less what's the word I'm looking for? Acrimony. So that then you have a little bit more pleasant parting of ways.
Okay, so I have two more questions before we go to our viewers. How can charities identify and manage conflicts of interest? Because I prior to the questions coming in, there was a question about, can I get my family member to sit on the board of this small charity? Francis, firstly, can they get their family member to sit on the board?
It will be something that your charity, your small charity, needs to think long and hard, because it's not about can I get the person on or not. The question is, will they fit in with the mission? And then how does it play out in terms of governance? All right. And then also in terms of the optics, how will that look like to your constituents, the people, your fundraisers, the people or your donors? All right, are they going to have the confidence in such a setup? And that is why the Code of Governance, provides for those guidelines, the checks and balances, so that it's not just aspirational, but it's also to establish confidence, the people that you are serving and trying to reach. So in terms of identifying conflict of interest, I use a simple rule of thumb. Is there a potential or actual benefit that will be received from the relationship? If the answer is yes to any of these, then a real conflict of interest has arisen. And I would say that then whatever relationship that may be, relative, no relative, or whatever, you shouldn't be stepping into the role, because it may do more harm than good in the long run.
Patrick, Paul?
Just wanted to add 1 or 2 points. I think firstly, in regards to the conflict of interest, you're talking about board appointments, but there are also situations where the charity engages services or buy products from board members, companies, for example.
Yes.
So I think very, very important, just like in any other standard governance rules, if there's a need to, declare it upfront, do your necessary declarations at the onset of meetings and get it properly documented, so that come any allegations or whistleblowing that comes after that, then it's easier to be able to counter that particular action or particular purchase, etc. I won't go into this entire conflicts kind of declaration situation, but not just declaration, sometimes you may need to exclude yourself from voting and etc., making decisions of that. So, or to recluse, and that's a whole lecture anyway. But I thought that's an important point. But however, I like the way Francis put it on potential and actual benefit. I think that's a good proxy conflict interest situation. But it also brings to my mind example of a particular charity where a particular family has made a large amount of donation to that particular charity, or its charity to run its cause, its mission. And by putting or appointing a member of the family who made that extremely large donation into the board, well, some may say, wait, isn't that appointing a family member inside the board? But you see the synergy there is, well, that person or that family member is actually helping to ensure there's a good stewardship of the large sums of money that are being put into that charity. So that's an example where, I wouldn't say it's a conflict interest situation, but more to ensure that the fund goes to where the mission or the purpose and the intent of.
So, but just to jump in there, even in that example that Patrick gave, I would be quick to point out that that family member that's being appointed may not necessarily be receiving any benefit. All right. But the question is whether that person will then ultimately be having a potential or an actual benefit. And I just want to demystify some of the things that Patrick was saying so that we don't alarm the audience. The declaration is when you are coming on board as a board member, you would have to make a declaration of all your various interests so that it's upfront and documented. There would probably be a refresh either 6 months or annually, or whenever there's a new appointment that you have to make a fresh declaration. And then assuming you use that test of actual or potential benefit in any situation where this kind of actual or potential benefit arises, then in the meetings and deliberations regarding that topic, you should excuse yourself and not participate in the voting. And in the meetings, that should be documented that you had excused yourself. It's called recuse, all right? The technical term from this meeting and the reason for doing that, and have it all documented. So everything is transparent, accountable, and this leads to greater transparency and confidence.
Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this issue, the question I'll ask myself is not so much whether this person has got a relative or is a good friend of so-and-so. I will ask myself 2 questions. Number one, what is the value that this person can bring to the board? And the fact remains that if the person can bring in, for example, this person is of high net worth, and he or she is able to influence her high net worth friends to come and support the cause, I will gladly bring the person in for that particular cause. And this person might actually be the spouse or the sister or the brother of another board member. So long as the person declares outright that there's no conflict of interest, that he or she doesn't benefit from being appointed as a board member, then I think it's up to the nomination committee to make a recommendation to the board. And I don't see that as a great issue. The issue comes in when there's a conflict of interest or when there's a potential conflict of interest, then we need to be very careful.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we're going to go to our viewers here today. Now, a reminder to all our participants, you can still send in your questions, and I'm going to get to your questions. A lot of very interesting and exciting questions. The first one, which had quite a number of votes, Francis, I think this is for you. What kind of recourse or support do charities have when dealing with errant employees who start defaming the organization, specifically on social media, in the event when they're asked to leave or they're fired?
Well, I would say you need to consult a lawyer, all right?
What
But
they can afford one.
well, let's put it this way. Nowadays, it's very easy to get into the firing line because with social media, disgruntled people can just fire off a post and bring down your organization. So it may not be a question of whether or not you can afford legal advice. I think when the time comes, you need to weigh up all the costs and the benefits. And if legal help is needed, then that is necessary for you to take that course. But let's dial it back a little bit because we need to be a little more preemptive. If you had better communication and prevented the disgruntled employee from being aggrieved in any event, all right, then that is something why investing in communication training and the way to supervise or manage is so important, because that is something preemptive that you can do. Having the objective criteria that I mentioned earlier about someone feeling aggrieved, if that person goes on social media and says you've been unfair, you've been whatever, you know, and then you might want to then engage with that person and say, we have the records, we have the objective criteria that we have used. Come down for a talk because this is harming you and harming the organization. And can we go for mediation? All right. So interestingly, Patrick has, got a mediation program that's been set up to deal with all these kind of complaints where the process is fast, efficient, cost effective, and also very timely and confidential. So I won't steal Patrick's thunder, but I'll let him perhaps develop on that point a bit more.
Patrick, share with us a little bit about this program.
Yeah. So now we are really pushing for alternative dispute resolution because we have something like more than 1.2 million union members, and one of the key things is that in a unionized company we usually have conciliation at the Ministry of Manpower, but the bulk of people who are members but are not in the unionized companies, we have developed a mediation service in partnership with some of our mediation organizations to help them to resolve some of the workplace issues, and not just workplace issue, but issues in general, at a relatively lower cost. I wouldn't say it's totally free, but it's lower cost so that we can try to resolve things at the lowest level. Because as I mentioned earlier, many of the disputes and unhappiness at the workplaces are oftentimes because of miscommunication, lack of communication, or misinformation. So that's in a way one of our or should I say new initiatives to address this.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Paul, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Someone's asked, what are some of the employee well-being initiatives that you know that are low cost but have high impact? Do you know of any initiatives for employees' well-being?
Dementia Singapore.
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have put in place way before we're talking about work-life balance is this thing about switching off your phone. So our employees,
It's low cost.
yeah, very zero cost.
Zero
So
cost.
employees are not required to respond to emails from board members or from any one of their colleagues for that matter after office hours. So that's something that we think is very important because, well, we don't need a minister to tell us that, but we actually put that in place somewhat already, and it does help to contribute to respecting people's time after office hours. And I think that's a very simple and maybe even free way of putting in place something like that.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that we have many recreational and green spaces. So doing exercise could be a simple brisk walk with the department, with fellow colleagues, or doing some exercise and having some fun outdoors, weather permitting. I think are very low, in fact, not even low cost, it's free. And we have so many park connectors and a lot of nice places. Like the recent one I I was just involved in the completion, the Jurong Lake Park, or should I say
Yes.
Jurong Lake Garden,
Big card.
and also the completion of Chinese garden and Japanese garden. Lovely. I was there, and I thought it's a great space for some employee engagement. You can do, yeah, you can have a picnic there, weather permitting. My suggestion is go in the evening because you can see the sunset and it's not so warm. And you can see the especially this month is mid-autumn, so the moon tends to be a bit brighter and nicer.
So I think one of the things also can consider is actually going out as a department, going to grab coffee, not whiskey, as Paul says. Makan durian season is here. There's so many things that's low cost. Maybe I'm going to open this question up. How should organizations handle requests to work remotely overseas, for example, 3 months, as a staff needs to take annual leave for family reasons? Should the organization be concerned about the staff's legal and tax issue? So trying to distill it is someone is wanting to go away, takes the annual leave for 3 months for family reasons, specifically overseas. I think the organization is a little bit concerned if there's any thing that the staff's legal and tax issues. Do they still have to pay for the taxes? Do they not pay? Patrick?
Yeah, I was just reading the question and I wanted a bit more clarification because here is one working remotely overseas, and the other one is taking annual leave. So is it working or is it annual leave?
Let's do working remotely.
Yeah, so
for 3
let's
months.
take it as one each as a time. So if you're working remotely, I think this is something which the staff or the employee needs to speak to the supervisor and the HR as well as the boss or the company or the employer, see what works, whether it's amenable and whether such a sort of flexible work arrangement is possible. So as I alluded to earlier, I think it's important to have very open, transparent communication. If it's a family obligation, maybe accompanying a spouse for, I don't know, it could be overseas treatment or work engagement, and then therefore need to be away. So I think this is a very, very important practical handle or tip is to speak to HR and the boss to come up with something that's workable and win-win for both the staff as well as the company. And as in annual leave, I don't know whether any company gives 3 months annual leave,
I
but
want to go there.
well, maybe accumulate a bit of leave here and there, but I know 3 months is quite okay. But I take it that he or she wants to work remotely, maybe accompanying someone or just whether we can make such a request. I thought useful at this juncture to also mention flexible work arrangements is not work from home or work anywhere. It involves 3 key pillars: flexi work, flexi time, flexi place. So I just wanted to say this because it addresses some of the other questions that
Yes.
come later as well. What about frontline staff, etc. So I think important is that flexible work arrangements does not equals work from home. Home is one of a possible manifestation of flexible arrangement because you can work at any place, which means you can even work off a coffee shop or a cafe or at home, or at a company where you're tasked to service, etc. So that's the flexi place concept. So just don't have that misunderstanding that FWA means work from home. It's not. It can be flexi time. For example, frontline staff, if you are driving a bus, I can't tell the bus driver, can you work from home? It's practicality, and operational needs, as I alluded to earlier. For healthcare staff, for example, they can actually, I've seen some institutions where they got some of their re-employed staff or retired staff to co-share. So it's flexi load, meaning that job sharing, etc. So that's an example. But back to the question on whether tax and laws, if you are still on an employment contract with that particular charity in Singapore, you will still be its employment, even if you work only, will be governed by that contract and by the governing law of that contract, and where the service is provided is in Singapore, right? I mean, you're working still for organization in Singapore and serving the people here, and therefore, in terms of laws, it's still local laws. In terms of tax, still local tax, unless it's an arrangement where it's providing some goods and services or adds to the complication in that particular jurisdiction. So that's my attempt at answering that legal question.
Okay. So, Paul, I think maybe I can ask you this question. How does a charity implement FWA for frontline staff? I know you spoke about how Dementia Singapore, can you maybe share that again? How do you all do flexible work arrangements for your frontliners, your caregivers?
Well, firstly, it's not an entitlement. It's not that everyone is able to do this. I think the crux of the issue is whether or not you can perform the task that you are supposed to perform away from your workplace. So if that is possible, maybe possible for X number of days or X number of hours per day, then I think it's a conversation that the employee can have with the supervisor. And I mentioned just now that, other than work from home or work from somewhere else besides the workplace, you can also have flexi working hours. So that's how we do it. But frontline staff, like the bus driver thing that Patrick said just now, it's a bit difficult. It's probably almost impossible. And people need to understand why is it impossible.
Okay, Patrick, anything to add on that? No, Francis? No. So maybe a question for you, Francis. When there are legislative changes, do contracts need to be individually updated? Or is it possible to add a clause in the contract that refers to the HR manual so that only the HR manual gets updated and not the contract?
It is possible to have a clause in your contract that says prevailing employment laws will apply. All right, that would be a sufficient catch-all. If you are referring to your HR manual, make sure that the HR manual is going to capture updates as well. All right, so it is possible to incorporate all of the latest best practices by incorporating such flexible wording in your contracts.
Okay. Paul, I think this question I will ask you. What are your thoughts on hiring expertise to support specific functions, whether through short-term or freelance contracts? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say it's brilliant because we don't really have a lot of people here in Singapore. So whatever talent we have, we grab. And if the person so wishes, or if the company or organization allows and the work allows this person to work part-time or on fixed number of days per week, I think it's something that the person, the individual and the organization can work out mutually. So long as it's something that is a win-win, I think I'm all for it.
Patrick, anything to add? No, Francis? Okay, so this one is for Patrick, I guess. With flexi work arrangements in place in December, I think for both you and Francis, how will that affect WICA coverage, right? Since now I can work from home, what if I suddenly hurt myself at home while I'm working? Can I go and tell my employer about my medical? How?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Sure.
Patrick, you first.
Sure. I mean, in fact, there are quite a few questions on this, not just working from home, working anywhere, as well as working overseas if you're on an overseas assignment. So take note, as I alluded to earlier, some of you who have tuned in from the start, is that the WICA covers those in employment relationship in the course of work. I repeat again, it's the course of work. Yeah, so I naughtily have raised this in Parliament on a few occasions because we had started the work from home arrangements, especially during the pandemic period, and lo and behold, the senior minister of state actually answered me in Parliament that there are actually decided cases where there's an injury at home,
Yes.
during work hours, and therefore they filed a claim under WICA and succeeded. So there are cases for those who are tuning in. If it's work from home, if it's in the course of work, not doing something else, like gallivanting or shopping, really, if it's the course of work and you can show that proof, it will be covered under WICA. Likewise, if you're overseas on work assignment, again on work assignment, not on holiday, on work assignment, there are decided cases. In fact, there are a few decided cases in the Singapore courts where a person gets a heart attack and collapses in the hotel room while in the course of an overseas assignment. All these are covered because it's done in the course of work. So I think that those are the operative words, the course of work and the fact that in an employment relationship. So that's to allay some of your fears that with flexible arrangements, if I work anywhere and I get injured during my work hours, will I be covered? The answer is yes.
I just want to add to what Patrick is saying. Notice he used the words very carefully, an employment relationship, and also that it's in the course of work. This means that while there are successful cases in the courts, it is all subjected to evidence and proof. So you are going to be having to establish that in a court setting, and it's not necessarily straightforward. So just bear in mind that while the recourse is there, it may not be a walk in the park to get your claim recognized and paid up.
Okay. We're going to take two more questions and then we're going to round it up. And while I'm rounding up, think about a key takeaway you would like our participants to walk away with. This is actually for maybe Patrick. With the new maternity, paternity leave, shared parental leave coming up, how does an organization ensure they are fair in terms of promotion when staff are away on such long leave or shared leave? So any advice on that?
I think the very, very important thing is supervisors, especially supervisors that are involved in appraisal of staff. I think it must be very, very clear and in the appraisal forms, the things they are appraising, i.e. the KPIs, the grading of staff's performance and the deliverables. And I think it's important to make it as objective as possible. So that come at the end of the year, whether it's on parental leave or on maternity leave, if you are given these KPIs for the year, you deliver it, whether meeting, exceeding, overly exceeding, or not meeting, then it will reduce many of these miscommunication or misunderstanding that, why didn't you tell me earlier? Yeah, this was my KPI or this is my targets, and it's because of my leave that therefore I can't achieve this. I mean, so if you set the targets clear and objectives of this in a very objective manner, I think it does reduce some of these unhappiness and subjectiveness. So I thought that's a good recommendation particularly for HR, hiring managers, supervisors, and of course boards across our charities. So be clear, and like I said, it's always good to be fair and progressive.
So speaking about HR practice, Paul, there's one question. In an NPO, how important is it to have a dedicated HR person to take care of the finer details? Because again, in a lot of charities, people wear many hats. Is it important to have a dedicated HR person, or is it a collective effort?
Well, if the NPO is able to afford the cost for CHRO, I think it's always recommended that you have a CHRO. But if you are a small charity or you cannot afford a full-fledged CHRO, please don't assign that task to a finance person, for example. I think Patrick may be able to weigh on this, because I think there are resources available for NPOs to actually avail themselves to get external support at a very affordable rate for HR professional advice. Is that right?
Yes, I think IHRP is a community of practice. So if really there are some of you who are already running charities, they can always approach them to see if any HR mentors or those who want to do some pro bono work can have access. So just like Pro Bono actually giving this legal advice and primer.
So one last question. An organization has already their work from home in place for a very long time. Is it still compulsory for them to put FWA in place in December?
Yes. As I shared earlier, important to look at what's in that. I'm quite sure most organizations, because of what happened in the pandemic, has already had some form of flexibility. But as I alluded to earlier, flexible work arrangements involves flexi load, flexi times, flexi place. So it's not just work from home alone. So just having a work from home alone policy is not sufficient. You should have to address all those three pillars of flexible work arrangements. So like I said, use the guide to your maximum ability and advantage, and just refer to that. I think that gives you a good grounding, and you need to change particular clauses, build in certain policies. It's readily available to cut and paste.
Okay, so while I get three of you to think about a key takeaway, I'll speak to our audience. So we have heard from our expert panel today, employment laws, HR practices, governance, which are critical aspects in how charities must navigate the employment landscape carefully, whether it is understanding your legal obligations, implementing flexible work arrangements, ensuring a proper HR practice is in place. Each of these areas play a pivotal role in maintaining the integrity and success of your charity. I want to thank all our participants today for sending all your questions. We tried to get to it as much as we can, and I hope we answered most of it. I would like to start with Francis first. Why don't we start with you? One key takeaway for our audience here today.
The one key takeaway would be what I began with. See the employment laws and legislation guidelines as your friend rather than something as an extra burden that you need to comply with, because these provide the framework, especially in Singapore, where they are trying to go for fair and progressive practices. And you might just find that you are able to then reposition your organization for the challenges that you may be facing.
Patrick?
Yeah, I'll leave you all with the 3 R's. Not reduce, reuse, and recycle, but ready, relevant, and resilient. Ready with the new skills and knowledge because things are being introduced in a quite breakneck speed sometimes. Relevant to your constituents, to your community that you're serving as a charity, and finally resilient because there will be curveballs, there will be changes, and there will be lots of in a very VUCA world. So just be resilient.
Well, I won't tell you what to do, but I will leave you with a question. The question is simply this: are you happy with the state of your organization today? If yes, I congratulate you. If not, then what would you do differently from tomorrow? And the additional thought I give to you is don't wait for things to happen. Make things happen.
And what I would like everyone to take away and emphasize that these practices are not just about compliance. It's about building trust with your employees. It's about building trust with your volunteers, the wider community, your donors, your stakeholders. It's all about communication. And on that note, thank you very much, all, Patrick and Francis, for joining us today and your invaluable insights. And to all our participants today, we hope you found our discussion helpful. And at the end of this webinar, a survey will pop up on your screen for your completion. We really appreciate your comments and feedback, and we will certainly use them for our future webinars. Now, if your charity needs legal advice, please email probonosg at assistnpos@probono.sg. I repeat that, assistnpos@probono.sg. Now, on behalf of Pro Bono SG, the Office of the Commissioner of Charities, we would like to thank our panelists. We'd like to thank everyone who logged in today and to the team who's here today for all your time, for being here. Thank you very much and have a great week ahead.
Thank you, Regana.